In this video, what I'll be talking about is the configuration of the Wonderware Online Insight Publisher tool, and more specifically I'll be demonstrating how that Publisher tool will be able to capture data from an OPC DA data server and move that into Wonderware Online. So the diagram you can see here is showing how we effectively move data from sources such as PLCs, lab systems and SCADA typically into a historian to act as a consolidated layer. That's what we have there in the red. And then we would normally expose the data from that historian via, say, an OPC DA server or an OPC HDA server. In this instance, what we've got here is an OPC DA server that we'll be using to connect the Wonderware Online Publisher to. I've got a demo system here that's set up and running Cytec SCADA with the OPC DA server running, so we'll use that for the demo. And once that OPC DA server is running, we'll configure the publisher and eventually move that data into Wonderware Online, and I'll show you how you can validate that data connection is formed and that the tags are moving through, or moving tag values through happily. Okay, so the first thing we want to do on the source system is we have this SCADA up and running. This is just an include project, and what I have here is just a loop mimic, and I've got a value or a couple of values on here that I know are active, so I can move a set point and then watch the value follow that set point in the SCADA. So what we're doing here is we've set up an OPC DA server on the SCADA, and the best way to validate that is to use a tool similar to the Matricon OPC Explorer. And what it allows us to do is to have a look at what OPC instances are running on this local machine. So you can see here that there's a Schneider Electric SCADA OPC DA Server .1. So that's my SCADA OPC available, so I can actually connect to that. Once I've connected to it, I can add a couple of tags, and you can see here that it shows me the values available in that server. And I can go down here and grab a couple of these tags that I've been altering in that mimic. So now what I have is the ability to monitor these values and see that they're actually being produced, or they're updating essentially. So you can see there that I've just dropped that set point down to 37, and then the actual value will follow that. So that OPC DA server is essentially valid and up and running, and we can see that using this Explorer tool. Now what we need to do is we will look at the installation of the Wonderware Online Publisher and how to configure it. So on the demo system that I have, I've already got the publisher installed, so I won't be covering that, but I will cover the configuration of each of the steps within that publisher. So you can see in this diagram here, I've listed from the bottom of the diagram the steps involved. So you can see that the first step here, we've set up that OPC DA server, we've validated that it functions correctly using that Matricon OPC Explorer. Inside of the publisher we have essentially three key steps. We need to set up the FS gateway item so that it looks at the tags in that OPC DA server. Once it's set up, we can also validate its configuration using that OPC Explorer. Then what we'll be doing is configuring an XML document that will define the tags that we wish to push through the publisher. And once we've got that document set up properly, we can put that into the publisher, and then it'll take us through to the online registration, where we then declare which solution we're pushing to and giving that data source a name. Okay, so back on the host machine, we're going to open up the System Management Console. Now this is installed as part of the publisher installation, and if we expand the hierarchy over here on the left, we can see that our local machine is listed. Now we're going to see this FS Gateway node. We might see a slight different name to that, but essentially this node will probably be in a deactivated state initially, so you get to you need to manually activate that. You also want to go and set that as an auto start for that service, so that if the machine is restarted, it'll fire up on its own. Underneath that item, you'll see that there's configuration and an OPC item by default. Now this item in here is where you need to create an OPC group object, and I'll just do this You can see that I've already got one, but I'll create a new one. We actually have to list that we're looking at the local host, and then we can find the OPC server that we looked at a little bit earlier that's coming from our SCADA system. So we need to select that as being the OPC server we wish to look at, so that when we configure tags inside of these groups, by default it looks at that OPC data source. So then we select the Browse OPC items. We can then pick the tags that we wish to take with us, and in this instance I'll take loop 1, PV and SP, and I can say OK to that. And you can see now it's listed those two tags in here. Okay, so I would then save that selection, and that would be saved. I can actually do that. Okay, so that's saved now, and as I said before, you may have to activate this server so that it's actually valid. Okay, so once we've done that, we can then go and validate that these tag groups are functioning and available. And again, we use this Matricon OPC Explorer, and you'll see that it lists the FS Gateway node in here. We can connect to that. We can then select Add Tags, because now what we're trying to do in here is we want to just check that those tags are valid. And you'll see here that I'll actually refer to Chris Test, because it's a folder that I've got configured that corresponds with my config a little bit later. So you can see that on that folder, which is set up the same as test, I've got the two tags are valid. Okay, those two tags are currently saying that they're bad, they've just come good now. So if I go back to SCADA and I just change that set point and the actual will follow, you'll see again that the values are updating. So now what we've been able to demonstrate here is that the FS Gateway is now serving up those tags. So those two tags now available on that gateway item, and that's the item that the Wonderware Online Publisher tool will be looking at to pull the values from. So the next thing we need to do is we need to import an XML configuration file that lists the tags that we will be taking from the FS Gateway and pushing through into Wonderware Online. Now the config file that is used to do that, here's an example here. So it lists out the tag, it lists out a bunch of metadata with engineering units. Importantly though, you need to have the FS Gateway name in here for each tag. You also need to have this topic name correct, and then the item name needs to be correct as well. So you can see here that it needs to be FS Gateway, and the topic name here, OPC underscore Chris Test, that corresponds with the structure that we have in here. So OPC underscore Chris Test. So if you've got some other name in here, it's going to be OPC underscore your name for that particular configuration. And then when we go into Chris Test, you'll see that the tag names that I've specified is what's here. So the name is L1PV. So you can see again in here OPC underscore Chris Test L1PV, and again it's got some other metadata listed in here. On the machine, I have a copy, an updated copy of that XML. It needs to be saved as an XML document in order for the publisher to be able to translate the values in it. So if I select that, what's happening then is the publisher tool has checked that the syntax appears to be correct. Now I get to nominate the location of where my Wonderware Online solution resides. So at the moment we have North America or Europe, and soon there will be also Australia listed here. So the solution I'm looking for is currently in North America, and in order to set this connection up, I need to connect to that solution. So I'll be prompted for a username and password in a moment. Okay, so now what I can do is I can give this a unique name, so I'm going to call it OPC DA Test 01. And it also just showed me a number of other data sources that are already on that solution, so that gives me a bit of guidance so that I don't try and name this connection as the same as something else that I already have. So you can see it's saying the application data is published successfully. So now that we've finished setting up the publisher, we should be able to see here in the System Management Console logs that connection has been set up properly. and that there's actually some tags being pushed into the Wonderware Online solution. Okay, so if we go across to the Wonderware Online solution, then we can see that our data source has been created. So test01 has been created. Currently it's saying that it's never published, but giving that a few minutes to push some values up, if we refresh that, we should see that it will come alive shortly. So you can see now that it's now saying a minute ago it received some data. Okay, so that's just pushed some values up in through that data source, which now is essentially updating it, and we'll be able to see that it's updating, and that's the best way to validate that your data source has been created and that values are moving through it. So until you see an update in here, you'll know that there's no values coming through that. But now what we want to see is that data source appear in the search. So sometimes again it takes a little while for the data source to be listed in here. So you can see that it has in fact listed my two tags that I'm pushing in, and it has a value for them. So you can see 77 and 78. So if I jump back into the machine here, at the moment you can see that they're the values that it has. So if I drop that set point again, what that'll do is it'll send the updated values, and then we should see that reflected in the solution as time starts going forward. So now inside of Wonderware Online I can obviously change to a more detailed view of those values here, and as they start to update we'll start to see them change in the solution here. So again I'll bump that set point up, and you'll see that it's quite responsive, so the updated values will start coming through within a minute or two of those changes. So you can see straight away that set point that I've changed and increased, it's basically come through within a matter of seconds, that change. Okay, as we mentioned before, we had the OPC server available to us. We then went and connected the FS gateway to a couple of the tags that were made available from the SCADA. We then went and configured the XML file and pointed them to the correct tags within that FS gateway. We then pushed that XML config into the publisher, which then led us onto the online registration, where we set up a data source name and the solution name, and the data source name, and gave that some credentials, and that was set up, and then we just validated that the values were appearing inside of our solution in the Wonderware Online Insight portal. Okay, so that's a brief description of what it takes to set up the online publisher. Thanks for watching.